friends, welcome. How are you? Welcome to another Changing Tracks. Today we have Rachel from the United States with us. Rachel, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your life, what your family was like?
Sure. I grew up in New Hampshire. It's in New England. I grew up in Campton, a small rural town up there. And I had two sisters, one older and one younger, so I'm the middle child. And I feel like I had a very good childhood. We were always playing outside and doing really fun things. We had two loving parents, and I often look back at my childhood with very fond memories, sort of a craving of like nostalgia for those days, because it was a really good time. So yeah, that was kind of me growing up, and I moved away from New Hampshire when I went to college. That's when I moved out of New Hampshire.
While you were in New Hampshire with your family, would you say that God was a part of your family life?
Absolutely. God was definitely part of our lives. We went to a CMA church, Christian Missionary Alliance, so we were Protestant Christian, and my whole family was Protestant Christian. I also have several half-sisters, and they're all Protestant, well, most of them. And let's see. Yeah, so I would say that was a very big part of our lives. We went to church every Sunday. In Protestant Christianity, they talk a lot about the relationship with God. So I definitely felt like I had a strong relationship with God, but I really didn't know anything about Catholicism whatsoever. I had no idea about it. And if anything, there was probably some anti-Catholic leanings, just like, oh, they pray to Mary, and that's not right. Just things about the Pope, we might have heard things that weren't good. So there was some anti-Catholic leanings, but I really didn't know much about Catholicism at all.
Okay, so how does your life develop? I mean, you spoke about your childhood, but what were your teen years like?
So in high school, I would say as far as my journey toward Catholicism goes, I think the biggest steps along the way were in high school. I got into my first relationship with my first boyfriend freshman year, and it really wasn't a very good relationship. He wasn't a Christian, and even though I wasn't Catholic, I was Christian, and so I had certain principles that I was trying to live by, and he wasn't trying to live by those principles at all. And we were so young, it was very difficult to stand my ground in that situation. And I definitely ended up caving and doing things that I regret doing, and I wish I could have done it differently, but at the same time, it did kind of make me who I am today, and it gave me experiences that now I can share with others and help others who might be in similar scenarios. And I also learned from that it's really not a good idea to date someone who doesn't have the same religion as you. It's really not a good idea. So after I got out of that relationship, I finished high school, I went off to college, and I was in another relationship my freshman year of college. So took a few years off, finished high school, and then met another gentleman, and he was Christian, and that was a good relationship. However, because of my previous relationship, I really did not want to get married. I was very scarred from that relationship. It really changed my view of marriage and family, and it wounded me in ways that I didn't realize that I'd been affected. I never really recognized that I used to want marriage and family, and then suddenly was turned off. I didn't want marriage. I didn't want to have kids. The very idea of it was awful to me. And so when I met this other guy, we had a great relationship, again, freshman year of college, but he was a little bit older than I was, and I could tell that he did want to move toward marriage. And he knew that, and we talked about it. And eventually he kind of recognized I just wasn't ready for it. And he was in a different phase, and he was ready for it. And so ultimately we kind of broke things off, and I went my separate way, and we ended on good terms. And I really respect him a lot for doing that, especially now in retrospect.
After those relationships, did you go out with anyone else during college?
Not really. I kind of took a break from that, but I guess I had a few flings, if you will, but it was really not until grad school that I got into my next serious relationship. And I would say that it ended up being a very toxic relationship, unfortunately, because I do, even now, still care about that fellow a lot. But even though he was Christian, he didn't take his relationship with God as seriously as I did, or if he did, it didn't seem that way to me. We seemed to be on different pages in some way with this. And I guess I just started really feeling my conscience pricking me, like this isn't right. And eventually I kind of slipped into some old habits with this toxic relationship. And we were kind of living in a way that wasn't according to Christian morals. And I spent several years with him, and during that time, certain members of my family, again, all of them had been Protestant Christian, they started converting to Catholicism. And I started hearing about this, and I'm like, what? What is going on? Because, again, I had sort of had these anti-Catholic leanings a little bit. We all had great relationships with God. What's going on? So first, my younger sister, Hannah, she converted to Catholicism. And then I found out later my mom was converting. And I was kind of like, wow, I really need to look into this, because if these people that I love so much and respect and care about and know to be really, sound people are converting to Catholicism, then I think I need to look into this. But I think the straw that broke the camel's back was when I found out my dad was going through RCIA and he was on his way to converting, and I was like, okay, what is going on? So I really started to look into Catholicism, to be open to it. Again, while I'm still in this relationship with this other guy who is Christian, but not on the same page as me, and now I'm starting to turn in a totally different direction.
So then, what did you do? Your whole family converts, your dad converts, and you? Did that kind of shake you up a bit?
So I basically was just like, okay, well, Lord, if this is true, and if this is something you want me to look into, then just guide me and show me your will. And so I decided that I would go to a Catholic church and just walk in and see what it was like there. And I went to one church, which ended up being closed. No one was there, and so I couldn't go in. Later down the road, I found out that church was actually, I forget what it's called, but it's when you're not in communion with the Pope, you're in schism or something. So it turned out that wasn't a good church to go to. But the next church that I tried, I think it was maybe it was Sunday morning or something, or it could have been a vigil mass, I can't recall. But I went to it. It was in Melbourne, Florida, because at this point I was living in Florida. I had moved down there for grad school. And it was called Our Lady of Lourdes. And I walked in, and I was kind of overwhelmed a little bit because there was a lot of people, and I was kind of late, and I didn't realize how hard it would be to get parking, so that made me even more late. And so I kind of crept to a seat in the back, and then everyone was chanting and saying things together, which was very unfamiliar to me. Doing the Hail Marys all together in unison, that wasn't something we did in the Protestant church. I mean, yeah, we prayed, but all together like that, not really. So I was kind of taken aback by it. But then a little Irish priest came out and started in on his homily, and I just loved it. It was so great to hear in this great little Irish accent an awesome homily about salt and light, that we are the salt and light of the earth. And I just kind of felt like if any Catholic church is for me, this is the one. Like, I'm gonna keep coming here. I really like this church after I heard Father Carl speaking. And so I kept going, and eventually I found out about the RCIA program, and I started going to that. And I thought RCIA was basically a program set up to educate you about Catholicism if you wanted to learn more about it. I didn't realize it was really more for becoming Catholic. And so I told everybody when I got there, I'm like, I'm just here to learn. Like, I'm not going to become Catholic, I don't think, but I just want to learn more about Catholicism. And that was a great experience because it was kind of a little family, right? We met every week, and I was entering into really the community of the church.
While you were in the RCIA program, learning about the sacraments of the faith, how was it that you had an encounter with the Lord?
Yeah, great question. Because I didn't really have a true encounter with Jesus in RCIA. That wasn't really doing it for me. And so at one point, the roommate that I was living with, who was also Protestant Christian, she decided that she was going to participate in Lent. And I was kind of like, okay, that's weird. She's not Catholic, but she wants to do something for Lent. And I think it was because her brother was doing it, also not Catholic, but he just wanted to do it. And it's so funny. I felt like, oh, that's a really good idea for her to do something for Lent. She really needs to do something for Lent. I should support her by doing something for Lent too. And so I decided, hey, you know what? I think that's great that you're doing that. I'm going to join you. I'm going to do something as well. So this was the first time I'd ever done anything for Lent. And instead of giving up something, I decided to take on a commitment. And I decided I would pray every morning on my morning commute to work out loud. And so I started doing it. It was about 20 minutes, I think, to work at that point. And I would pray out loud, and I would just start telling God how I was feeling, and confessing things, asking Him for things, and it became part of my routine. And as soon as I started doing this, and it became part of my routine, things started changing. I really felt God working in my life, and I just felt like I was making almost leaps and bounds forward in my spiritual journey. And there came a moment one day where I was praying, and I basically reached this point where I finally confessed certain sins that I had been doing in my life that I had never even admitted were sins. I had never even been able to speak them, never even been able to allow myself to think about them. And I just had repressed it all, but I knew that I was essentially addicted to these sins. And it was definitely very hard to do, even to say them out loud. It was hard. But I said, no, I have to do this. Jesus, I recognize that these are sins. And I don't want to stop doing these sins. And, I realized I was sort of addicted to these sins, but I also recognized that these were the stripes on Jesus' back. These sins were literally hurting Jesus. And I said, God, if I stop doing these sins, I don't really know what the point of living is going to be for me. I really feel like I was giving up my life at that point. I was just like, nah, there's not going to be any point. Life is just, it's going to be awful. There's no point. But I know these are wrong, and they're hurting Jesus, and I love Jesus. So I promise, Lord, that I will stop doing these just for Jesus. And in that moment, I was filled with this amazing peace and joy, like an overwhelming sensation flooding my whole body of great, great joy. A lot of these sins that I was thinking about and giving up were related to my relationships and sexual sins and the things that had wounded me over time and had changed my view of marriage and family to where I didn't want those things anymore. I didn't even realize that though. At that point, I just felt like I was giving up my life. I didn't realize that those things were actually preventing me from moving forward with my life. So in that moment of saying, I'm sorry for this and I'm not gonna do it anymore, I honestly felt like I had this vision that like a big ball of nasty like worms and scum was like being ripped out of my arm, like out of the flesh of my arm. I just felt like that was happening. And then suddenly I was open to healing and I was flooded with great joy. And literally in that moment, my whole mindset was like flipped and changed to where I saw the beauty of marriage and the joy of marriage and family. And I was like, wow, now I feel like I really do want these things. If I, am giving up these addictions, now I think I can see what the joy is in marriage and family. So it was just this amazing experience. But at that point, I had not even entered the Catholic Church officially. I had just kind of started learning about it, like I said. And so it was later, I think a couple months later, when I went home to New Hampshire for Christmas break, and I was talking with my parents and with my sister and everything about Catholicism, asking them questions, and everything they were saying always made sense. It was always lining up. I think it might have been then. It could have been at another point when my mom showed me a series of videos on Mary and the different reasons why we say the things we do about Mary in the Catholic Church, that she didn't sin, and she's the mother of God, she is the new Eve, like all these different things. So there was all these videos on it. It was like a whole series. And when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that really makes sense. So I started agreeing with that stuff. And I was already thinking everything they were explaining always made sense, but I still didn't agree on the Eucharist being really Jesus's body and blood. That didn't make any sense. I thought if Jesus is sitting there at the table with his disciples and he says, this is my body, like if I were sitting here with the salt and pepper in front of me and I took the salt and I said, this is me, and I put it down, like obviously it would be symbolic, right? So why, when Jesus lifts up bread and says, this is me, why isn't that just symbolic? I just thought it was a symbol.
Okay, so that was the only thing that was kind of holding you back from taking on or saying a definitive yes to the Catholic faith. Could you explain a bit how the Lord lifted the veil so that you could see the truth?
Yes, so I really was still held back by the fact that I really thought the Eucharist was just a symbol. But my mom gave me a book. I forget what the book was or who it was by. It was a little book. I think it was about different reasons why you should be Catholic and not Protestant. What are the hang-ups that a lot of Protestants have, and what are the arguments against those hang-ups that support the Catholic Church? So I took it home. Christmas break comes to an end. I'm back in Florida. I'm reading the book. I get through it, and I go through it point by point, and nothing was really standing out to me because I already agreed with everything the guy on the Catholic side was saying. Like, I didn't have these arguments as a Protestant. But the only thing was when it came to the Eucharist being truly Jesus's body and blood, the only argument I had was, I just think it's a symbol. It seems like it's a symbol from what the Bible is saying, from how I read it. I just think it's a symbol. And I finished the book. I closed the book. It was pretty late in the evening. And all of a sudden, the Lord literally just entered in and opened my eyes so that I could see that it wasn't just a symbol. I don't know how to describe this in any way that like you can fully understand, because it was a spiritual experience and the Lord was truly present, and you can't just like give that to someone else, you know? All I can do is describe it the best that I can. But the best way I can describe it is, it was like I was blind and then suddenly able to see. Or I actually had this vision of like these walls that I had built around me, these stone walls around me, just completely enclosing me in. And over time, like someone was outside the walls with a hammer or something, and they were like chinking away at the stones, chink, chink. And over time, like little bits were falling out and light was coming through. Little bits of light here and there. And in this moment, suddenly the whole structure just like collapsed, and I was just flooded with all of this light. Like my eyes were totally opened. Like a huge wave was just like crashing over me. I felt like a wave was crashing over me, a wave of the Lord saying, why wouldn't it be me? And I don't know how else to describe it, but I just knew, and I saw so clearly that it was truly Jesus's body and blood. That when he said, this is my body, he was turning it, transforming it into his body and giving it as a gift to us so that we could have it for all of time. And when I realized that, you know what else it meant? Jesus was here with us in our churches. And so I was so excited and was flooded with so much joy. And at this point, I'm like crying and just, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm having this amazing spiritual experience. And I look and I realize suddenly what day it is on the Catholic calendar. It was the day of Epiphany. And I just started crying all the more because I'm realizing I'm having this major epiphany on the day of Epiphany. The Lord's revealing himself to me. And I was so flooded with joy. And I was so excited to go to church because I realized Jesus is literally physically in the church and I get to go there and see him.
After that, when did you enter into the Catholic Church?
So when I had that epiphany, I realized, okay, if this is true, if you are really present in our church through the Eucharist, I have to become Catholic, obviously. Like, that's my next step for sure. So I went into RCIA. Again, I had kind of been there just learning, right? So I went into RCIA and I said, hey, I got great news. I want to become Catholic. And so I started the process of actually learning more in detail about what I had to do to get through that and to do the sacraments of confirmation, the sacrament of confession. So yeah, I went forward with it. My mom and my sister came down to see my confirmation, which was really wonderful. And I know that when I was thinking about becoming Catholic, I felt a lot of fear in a way because I knew this means I have to go to Mass every Sunday and I have to do all these specific things. And I don't really want to do this. This is hard. This is going to be really hard. But the Lord was telling me, all you have to do is take and eat. It's not something to fear. He's really here. He's really present.
Rachel, you have received a beautiful treasure. How would you define now your relationship with God, your relationship with the faith? Would you say that it has grown?
Yes, I would say that my relationship has definitely grown and I am so much closer to Jesus now. And I think that the one thing that I would say is like the greatest treasure, or I guess however you want to say it, would be obviously the Eucharist, having Jesus physically present and being able to bond with him physically as well as spiritually is a great and wonderful gift. But it's not only that. Being Catholic has allowed me to use my physical body to glorify God in all kinds of ways. And I didn't have that as a Protestant. I didn't know about that. So as I'm discovering Catholicism and the treasure trove of wonders that it is, and I'm finding out that all these prayers that we do and all these things that we do with our hands and everything, all of it has meaning and all of it helps draw us closer to God because we're not only professing a belief and we're not only having this spiritual relationship with God, but we're physically doing an action. We're physically conducting ourselves in a certain way that expresses that belief. So these behaviors solidify and grow the relationship in a way that was totally missing from Protestantism. And the sacraments are the epitome of this. The sacraments are where it's at, because they are real physical things that you do that have true grace associated with them, the Eucharist being the ultimate. Obviously, it is truly Jesus. You're truly physically bonding with him. And in doing that thing, in participating in these sacraments, you're not only saying you believe it, but you're acting that you believe it. You're behaving with your physical body in a way that shows you believe it. And so you can grow so much more in your faith, because we are creatures not only of spirit, but of matter, and they both matter. Our bodies really do matter. What we do really matters, and what we believe. And that was something that I was missing in my Protestant faith.
Rachel, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I'm sure that it will help a lot of young people who are watching to see all that you have received. Thank you. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sometimes a relationship with God is like a tightrope. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter, but it never breaks, because the Lord is behind it all, so that doesn't happen. Thanks for being here.